Welcome to the New Monastics podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics podcast. I'm Nathaniel, co-founder of Charis Foundation and dialogue partner for our guests.
And I'm Daniel, the host for the show.
Today, we've invited our friend Lisa Chatham for a roundtable discussion on life and spirituality. Lisa is a psychotherapist in Boulder, Colorado, interested in spiritual issues and a good friend of many years.
Welcome, Lisa. I'm so happy to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to do our second roundtable episode. And on these episodes, we like to have each person present a little topic, and then we'll kind of all riff on it. And we'll just go around and have a chat about whatever is kind of up for us and what we've been noodling about and thinking about and mulling over. So with that said, Lisa, do you have something that you want to bring to the table today?
I definitely do. I want to mention that I'm a faculty member at Naropa University, like Nathaniel, and I teach in the psychology department and in world wisdom traditions. And one of the things that has been on my mind a lot is how appropriate it is to utilize books or teachings of teachers who are associated with inappropriate behavior or scandals of some kind. Particularly Trungpa and Osho, I think, have been more highlighted lately. And I tend to draw on some of Trungpa's stuff in my classes because he is the founder of our university. And yet he is associated with so much questionably immoral behavior. And some of the students have had some pushback about utilizing that material. And I think about that a lot because when I read his books, I'm so profoundly impacted by his teachings and the way he thinks about things and what is clearly such an incredible, he just has such an incredible mind and is so tapped in to something that makes so much sense to me. And yet I can't reconcile or I can't resolve this tension between this incredibly spiritually sophisticated awareness and behavior that is like the maturity level of a 6-year-old at times. And so it's just something I've been mulling over. And, you know, some of my students definitely are offended by his books being utilized at the school. And I'm curious how you've dealt with that, Nathaniel, and what your thoughts or if you have a strong position about that.
I don't know if I have a strong position, but I've thought about it a lot. When I was a student at Naropa, 1998 to 2000, I was in the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist studies track. And like almost every teacher I had was a direct student of Trungpa Rinpoche. Almost every class utilized more than one text by him. And so it was all day, every day, all Trungpa. And I was one of the people that pushed back then. Not so much that I was personally affected or felt affected by his legacy. He was certainly brilliant to me. But I did think that in those days, there wasn't a lot of opening to a critical analysis. Not even just criticism, just critical analysis. And so today I find it kind of interesting that we have almost, even though he was the founder of the school, we have almost no faculty that were direct students of Trungpa Rinpoche, and we utilize very few texts, and yet it's much more an issue right now, which is a little interesting to me because he's not having that much impact on the school. But what I tend to think about is what we expect. What do we expect from teachers? And Trungpa Rinpoche is from a lineage of teaching that is highly unconventional, almost shamanic. And when we look at shamanism, just shamanism by itself, there is not an expectation in those cultures that the shaman's behavior is exemplary or prescriptive. Nobody thinks that the shaman is a saint. They think the shaman is effective, but nobody says that's how to behave. That's the model of behavior. Not necessarily at all. Those things are not linked in those cultures. And it's something that we link in our culture. And while, you know, very few of our students are Christian or would identify with Christianity or Judaism anymore, I think we still have the cultural holdover of those traditions, which is Christianity does have an idea of sainthood and that a person needs to be exemplary in their behavior, whereas most of the other traditions don't. They want the teacher to be effective. They don't expect you to model your behavior on theirs. And so, like, even though most of our students would have abandoned Christianity, they're still thinking in a Christian mode, which is just interesting. I think, you know, they can ask for a certain kind of purity, but what you can expect, I don't know. After a while, there's going to be nobody left to read or talk about if we have such high expectations for them. I happen to like listening to Wagner. Wagner was a horrible anti-Semite. I like his music. I don't subscribe to his views on Jews, especially being Jewish. So, I mean, everybody can make personal decisions around those things. But probably everybody you know has made room for somebody to be imperfect at their own convenience. If I'm a student at the University of Virginia, which is a very fine school, I don't necessarily get upset. I don't think it has anything to do with my student status there that Thomas Jefferson founded it and had slaves. Like, how distant does it have to be? I don't know, And he also wrote the Declaration of Independence, a very fine document, but everything in his life was not perfectly moral. I think we just need to complicate our view. It's not simple.
Yeah, and I think what we're talking about in a way is two different extremes. Natano, you're naming when you were at school at Naropa. When I was there, I experienced some of this as well, which is a tendency to dismiss or write off Trungpa's behavior, and maybe some other teachers in that same vein describing it as crazy wisdom and justifying it, and not critically analyzing behavior and being comfortable with saying, oh, wow, this is a teacher who's produced brilliant works and teachings that have made incredibly positive impacts on people's lives, and yet exhibited behavior that was harmful or destructive or inappropriate. And so that's one extreme, the kind of writing off the bad for the sake of the good. And then, Lisa, it seems like what you're bringing to the table is the opposite extreme, which is this tendency that we have right now with quote unquote cancel culture around writing off the good that somebody has produced or done because of bad or inappropriate behavior that they've done as well. And that maybe neither extreme is appropriate or ideal, and that, as you're speaking to, Nathaniel, there's a kind of middle ground where we're not trying to write off anything or justify anything or say that the shit don't stink. And we're not trying to say that brilliant wisdom is not wisdom that can also be really valuable. And then that leads, I think, to an interesting question, which is what's going on there with some of these spiritual teachers who, if you look at them in depth, you can't dismiss them as charlatans in any way. They clearly have profound realization and they clearly misbehaved. And we have these traditions that tend to say if someone is realized, quote unquote, a fully realized being, right? Set up this ideal that then everything they do is a manifestation of enlightenment and is kind of writes off the bad or like doesn't leave space for critical analysis. And so I think that's the interesting question that this all raises is what's happening there? How is it possible to both have this kind of profound realization and profound misbehavior?
So, do we all agree that a person can be fully realized and cause great harm?
I don't know that I buy the or invest in the phrase fully realized. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I wasn't buying it as it was coming out of my mouth.
I mean, if you rephrased it and said, that they have realization, some realization that is important and profound, and have done things that are immoral or harmful, and then I say yes, it's like we're messy humans.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I immediately think of way back in history of all of these biblical figures who did a lot of bad things. They're what a teacher of mine used to call mistake heroes. There's something heroic, and almost every figure in the Bible has some kind of core flaw and at some point manifests in some kind of behavior that is not exemplary. And that the teaching or the learning in part is in seeing that mistake and trying to learn from their mistake. And I think when we're talking about teachers in this way, I think it does get to this kind of idea of fully realized, because I think it breaks it down in a way, because this fully realized notion is what leads to like, oh, everything they do is perfect. And yet I think in our felt sense of it, there's something in us that says, no, that thing is something I don't agree with or feels off in my body. And yet there's something else, a teaching or book or something that resonates so deeply and is deeply nourishing. And I think that kind of complicated reality helps maybe inform spiritual ideals and what do we expect of spiritual teachers and what is reasonable to expect from spiritual teachers, and how do we learn from other humans who are flawed, because we're all flawed and we all have gifts. And so that's a little bit aside from kind of questionable behavior, but just in a broader sense, right? Like we're all kind of messy people. We all have our different facets and our neurosis and our wisdom, right?
So what do you think, Lisa?
About what in particular?
I mean, where do you land on this? I mean, you presented it as a question, but I know you got thoughts on whether this is valuable or not, these things that are in these teachings and so on from these imperfect teachers.
Yeah, I do think that their teachings are still valuable. They have been to me personally. It's the question that I find most compelling and provocative because from a psychological perspective, I think our tendency to really want things to be black and white or good and bad is just, like it just would make things so much easier. Like we have this fantasy that if we could just categorize everything, it would somehow simplify this human experience in a way that makes sense. And yet, so much of life, the entirety of life, in my experience, is that it's a constant contradiction. Even personally, I feel like I'm constantly contradicting myself. I think what you said, Nitana, was, do we make room for our teachers' imperfections?
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately thought to myself, do I make room for my imperfections as a teacher, as a therapist. I do a lot of high conflict family therapy, and I'm a mother of four. And I've made horrendous mistakes as a mother. There have been moments in my parenting where I majorly dropped the ball. And so I just notice how quickly my mind feels so much more comfortable if I can just be like, it's good or bad, it's right or wrong. And yet all of that feels like so limiting at the same time to myself, my potential, and just to everybody else's. What is it like to hold all of that contradicting energy in my experience? And can I, in my own life and in the lives of others?
I think there's a difference too between, the sociology of the situation and the psychology of the situation. When you come from the psychological perspective, you can't suppress this without putting it in shadow. We have to deal with the complexities as they are, beauty and ugliness sitting right next to each other. If we try to, divide them, we only divide ourselves. I just don't think that we can do this process of a kind of puritanical purification without putting stuff in shadow in such a way that is going to reveal an irony in ourselves. Like we're going to end up the butt of the joke, the cosmic joke, And how do we make those judgments about somebody else? We do it all the time, but it's called hypocrisy, while ignoring, what you're pointing out about yourself, and our own mistakes. If we expect someone else to be mistakeless, do we have that same expectation of ourselves? I don't know. I just think it's a very complicated issue, and it should be treated as such, not as if it's simple. Get rid of that. I don't know what we can do that with.
And I think some of, as I'm imagining some of my students in the classroom would say, we're not talking about just mistakes here. We're talking about, bigger, more
patterns of behavior.
Yeah, patterns of behavior and more, overtly harmful behavior than just a mistake. And I like what Daniel touched on. I've definitely heard people say that some of Trungpa Rinpoche's behavior in particular, he would behave in these outrageous ways. And I've heard students excuse that behavior and actually say he was behaving this way to provide an opportunity to his student to, have some spiritual transformation or something like that. And I think, that's garbage. And I don't want to minimize, justify, or excuse any of his behavior, but I do like this idea of being able to hold both.
I think it comes down to a core thing we're grappling with culturally, which is how do we put a hand out and say stop and no to certain destructive behaviors while also not rejecting and throwing human beings away and writing them off and, throwing stones in glass houses.
Yeah, I personally object to a lot of the behaviors that are described. I really do. Some of them make me angry when I hear about them. But I do want us to examine our expectations of so-called spiritual teachers. At almost no time in the past was there an expectation that their behavior was exemplary for me, or that I should just follow that example. It was not expected that they were perfect. I think we've got some conflated ideas. There are people that were considered wise, and there were people that were considered effective spiritual teachers, and they weren't always the same archetype. And I don't think that we think about that. So, like as a so-called spiritual teacher, at one point I was like, can I even date? Because like there's some sort of expectation to me that, of me that like I'm supposed to be holy all the time or something. It's too high an ideal. Like, can I be a person? And who am I going to meet that hasn't maybe seen a YouTube video of me or seen me being charismatic in a public situation? And then are they actually seeing the real me? So how do I interact with the person that has these projections? It feels like a really weird area.
I love that you called it weird. It is really weird.
It is weird. Do you get to be a person when you're in a role of teaching about a spiritual practice that has been transformative for you?
My father is a minister. I think you remember that.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that we moved to Colorado was because he wanted to be promoted to senior pastor at the church that we had grown up in and that he worked at when I was growing up in his house. And they wouldn't give him the promotion because his teenagers were so rebellious. They felt that it was a reflection of
It was you.
his inability to, pastor a church. I'm not going to mention any names about which teenagers they were referencing. Anyway, apparently they were holding him to, a higher standard of parenting. But it's just, it's just
rhymes with Tisa. Yeah. Well, should we move to another discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think we solved that one. We can put a check on the checklist. Problem solved. So Lisa, you can direct your students to listen to the podcast if they have any quabbles, and then the expectations is that, voila, no more questions around this topic.
One of the things I usually say to my students on the first day of classes is to expect non-closure. So
people listening to this podcast should expect non-closure. We're going to just open cans of worms.
Yes, we like to open cans of worms and then sit in the tension of questions and the web of different ideas and constellations that are kind of pulling in different directions sometimes.
I mean, worms shouldn't live in a can. That's all there is to it. Like, what were they doing in the can anyways? So let them out. Be free, worms.
I think spiritual seekers have an appetite for that unresolvable tension.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Let's go with that.
All right. Well, then, Nathaniel, will you open our next can of worms?
Well, I'm a little torn right now. Like, I could riff off of the idea that we've been exploring, or I could just go in another.
Take us left.
Okay. Well, I guess I've been thinking about the future a lot. I'm preparing a new course. It's a course I've taught before, but I'm going to teach it in a totally different way. And so I've got a theme for it. It's my religion and mystical experience course. My theme is from Chogyam Cave to Star Wars. And Chogyam Cave is, among the cave art that we have, it's among the earliest. So it's in France. And it's clear that it has kind of spiritual import and overtones to the art on the wall. And so Chogyam Cave for me is like the idea of what our earliest spirituality might have looked like 33,000 to 40,000 years ago. Because there's no evidence that we left Africa until about 50,000 years ago. So in 10,000 years, we'd made it all the way into Europe, and we have this cave art that is amazing. I mean, just from an artistic standpoint, it's amazing. Because it's not like the artist can practice sketching the way we can. And yet, as a visual artist, I look at it and I think those lines are so confident. So these are people, they're taking impressions of animals that they're seeing, and they've got a very clear idea. Like right now, I can go on Google Images, and pull up a lion, and then I can draw that lion from that image there. They didn't have that. And yet they're drawing very confidently. And it's a way of living with nature that has impressed itself on our beings, and the hand just responds to the image inside. It's clear that there's a kind of spiritual import to what's happening in the cave. One, we didn't live in those caves, but we're going in there and drawing in them. So it's not like you're just drawing on the walls like I did in the bathroom at my childhood home, and I ruined the walls by taking my mother's lipstick and drawing on the walls. They're going in there to draw, and it looks like for ritual purposes. It's not art as a personal expression, it's ritual art. So anyways, my idea is to look at the early cave art, and it's so early that we don't really have evidence for a view of what their spirituality was, which means it's early enough for us to fantasize about what it might have been like to be spiritual 33,000 years ago. Whereas if I go to 5,000 years ago, I can look at a lot of archaeological evidence and spec in, and we have some clear idea about what religion was. So going to the earliest end of our spirituality, and I want students to dream there. Think about what would it have been like to be spiritual then. And then the second half of the class, I want us to reach as far into the future as we can. And to use Star Wars as a metaphor for a kind of spiritual futurism. Since, that's a kind of a popular science fiction genre or body of work, when you look at the Jedi in a movie or something, with the exception of maybe a 30-foot vertical jump, a lot of those things are just things that we can do. A certain kind of peacefulness of mind and concentration. I don't know about moving objects, but I've been thinking about it since I was a child.
You'll get there one day. Don't worry.
Of course, I'm working on it. But when you conceive of that ideal, that's just a dream of the future that is composed of parts that we already have, for the most part. And so, I want to say to students, build a Jedi. What would they need to master and learn to be that kind of spiritual ideal? Maybe there it's like a spiritual warrior or something. But you could study all those things. And so between these two extremes, to dream in our deepest past and reach into our furthest future, I think we'll find something that is a way to live now. We've lost connection to something, and we also don't dream big enough either. And so, I want to explore this ground of what we're looking for, to recover our primal spirituality and then take it as far into the future so that we might create a path to get there. Right now we're walking in circles, kind of caught in a postmodern loop. And I think we need to reach into the future to, lay out the steps to get there. So that's my left turn.
That was a heck of a left turn.
You're welcome.
Also, as a therapist with a psychodynamic background, I'm much more interested in exploring your mother's lipstick on the walls, but but I'm happy to engage this topic as well.
I didn't know what the lipstick was. It was just there and it was color. Though now that I think about it, I can see the kind of image I drew on the wall, and it looks a lot like one of these lions that's drawn in Chogyam Cave. So maybe there is a connection.
There we go.
All right, go ahead, psychoanalyze me.
I'll submit my full report.
Thank you.
Later today, I'll send it an email.
And I just have this question around what makes these paintings in Chogyam Cave the earliest kind of discernible thread of religion or spirituality that we have, because it just seems like even the process of our kind of pre-Homo sapien ancestors developing and becoming Homo sapiens, and the development of language and the earliest kinds of music and all of those things feel like there was a maybe inherent spirituality or something that looking back on, we could kind of put that term on, even if it wasn't formed. And that was obviously hundreds of thousands of years ago. So I'm curious about, in your mind, as you're thinking about this, like what makes Chogyam Cave a natural earliest starting point that we have? Is it just a matter of evidence? Like that's the first discernible evidence we have?
Yeah, I mean, I could start a little earlier. Like there's a cave called Kafsa Cave in what is today Israel from about 100,000 years ago. Actually, it's there's a burial chamber in there, and there's a skeleton of a human Homo sapiens, probably about 14 years old, who clearly had a traumatic brain injury. And they can tell that they lived with this traumatic brain injury for a number of years. So they didn't die from it necessarily, which is one interesting thing that shows that we took care of our damaged individual, that they weren't just, survival of the fittest thrown by the wayside. This child was taken care of for a number of years with a debilitating injury. But at a certain point, the child died, and they're placed in a grave. It was hard to dig this chamber because it was in rock, placed in it in a certain kind of posture where they're holding antlers of a red deer, and the body was probably smeared with red ochre. That's starting to suggest ritual, like, why the red deer? Deer antlers suggest renewal. Maybe there were ideas of renewal that were now being connected with. We seem to smear a lot of things with red ochre way back in the past, like it was sacred to us for some reason. We don't know why. So these are suggestions, but that's a burial chamber. Chogyam Cave we're getting cave art, and it's among the earliest. And there are indications in there, like we're getting the first indications of a human form presented in a way that it doesn't look like a figure drawing class. There's like kind of a pillar coming down out of the ceiling in the deepest part of the chamber where you could not go without torchlight. And there's on this kind of stalactite coming down, the V of a woman's, or the triangle of a woman's vulva being embraced by a kind of bison figure. So now we're seeing indications of kind of early religious ideas. So that's the first time we're really seeing these things. There are no real human figures before that, before about 40,000 years ago. And when we do see human figures, it seems to be fetishized or combined with animal figures. They don't usually have heads. So anyways, that was a lot, but I've thought about this.
No, thank you. That's clarifying. And then I'm curious, Lisa, what is this idea of like the religion or spirituality of the future and this kind of Star Wars idea? Of course, Nathaniel loves Star Wars, so that would naturally be like the vision of the future. I'm curious how that hits you or strikes you in terms of just the idea of, what would religion or spirituality, what might it look like in, say, 500 years?
Yeah, I don't really like Star Wars. This is where Nathaniel and I sort of diverge.
You don't have to like Star Wars. Just like dream of the future.
Do you like the future?
I don't really like the future. No. Yeah, it's interesting because, I'm not a big fan of technology, even though I use it, I figure it out. But I've had some, I don't know, grief about how technology has sort of changed things. And I've never really spent a lot of time thinking about how it could maybe make a more sophisticated, spiritual life for us in some way. So it's hard for me to imagine that because just deep down, I crave less of that. When you were talking about, this more primal time in history, that's what really makes me feel excited. A deeper connection to my animal body. That is what feels most alive and most spiritual to me, is this immediate, embodied, juicy, aliveness in my entire
Mhm.
system. And I just feel really drawn to that. And I find that a lot of spiritual systems, well, they're incredible and they're compelling, and I love thinking about them, and I love the practices that are associated with them. Sometimes I find some of it to be like too heady, like another coping mechanism or a subtle exit strategy. And I'm curious a lot about how our love for comfort has taken away, is losing something. I've recently started doing cold plunges, like in the last year or so, and I'm a huge fan of ice baths now, and other experiences that kind of recover this primalness in my system that I don't know that I've ever really experienced in any other practices. And I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, and I didn't necessarily answer your question. I feel like I answered it by saying I'm not coming to Star Wars of the future. I guess I don't have a vision for it. Do you, Daniel?
No. Hard pass in a tunnel, quick.
This is precisely my point. I think if we don't learn to understand our past, we will not have a future. I think if we do not understand our evolution, we will not survive. And we made a really hard turn about 11,000 years ago with the food revolution. And we started to live very differently, very quickly. And so my Star Wars future is not about technology. It's how we're going to maintain our humanity with it. And that has to start now. Like, we cannot even utilize our technology in a responsible manner unless we understand how we've evolved. That most of our psychology is driven by evolution, and that we ignore it creates so many problems for us. We ignore those drives that are evolved over millennia, and we act as if we were born yesterday and can do whatever we want with our lives. And when you don't acknowledge that evolution is driving, then it's definitely driving. And so, like, I don't think that we'll find that future. And so the Star Wars for me is the Jedi, when you look closely, is not utilizing a ton of technology. They've learned how to still be human and integrated and resource their great inner abilities, even in the face of all this technology that everybody else is using. And then when they got to hide, they go to the desert and to Dagobah, to the swamps, and live as natural, beings. And so I find that interesting. So, I don't want a chip implanted in me. Like, I want to figure out how to use this magnificent body and tool. So I'm with you.
Well, I'm just laughing over here because this is all dovetailing so perfectly into what I wanted to bring up. So I'm wondering if I can grab the mic and bring it up.
All right, do it. Or like in Split, grab the light. You seen that movie Split?
Nope. That reference just went so far over my head.
Okay. Well, I'll just say you grab the light.
I'll grab the lightsaber. All right, we lost Lisa. I think she's rolling her eyes at us.
I do that in every conversation with her. So go ahead, Daniel.
No, so what I wanted to bring up is this idea of technology. I was sitting on a bench yesterday.
Like an old man.
Like an old man, yeah. And I was really chewing on this idea of where do we go with technology and how do we make technology beneficial to humanity? And a lot of the direction where I was going is the juxtaposition of technology being beneficial to humanity with what feels like the current state is now, which is just technology being produced and mostly in service of making money and profit more than human well-being. And feeling this really strong sense of, if we don't tether the proliferation of ever more powerful technologies to the well-being of humanity and the plant kingdom and animal kingdom and the planet Earth, we're fucked. Excuse my language. And it being, on the one hand, really scary and feeling really vulnerable because who controls the technology? Who has the means to invest the billions and trillions of dollars into the creation of these mega powerful technologies? What are they being used for? And really, what is the aim? And that's what feels like is missing. We don't have a collective agreement around technology should be X, Y, and Z to be beneficial. You know, it should make a more equitable world. It should make a greener, more sustainable world, right? We don't have these kinds of agreements. It's a kind of free for all. And technology is not a populist thing. The development and dissemination of technology is in the hands of rich and powerful people, and the vast majority of people don't have any role in the creation of that technology or really deciding what it is used for.
Yeah, they're customers.
Right. I don't know how this computer, this microphone works. I don't know how any of this works. Like, I'm with Lisa. I mean, I feel like I was born like 300 years too late. I feel like I would be pretty happy in some cobbled streets. No cars, no any of this. Like,
we have better bathrooms, though. We have much better bathrooms.
Yeah, no, and we have like access to like the world music catalog, despite the issue of Spotify not paying artists. Love me some Spotify, you know? Like, come on. That's epic. That's technology that seems as beneficial to me. I enjoy it as part of like up-leveling culture. And yet it's also not made to really be of benefit. And so that's what I'm thinking about. I'm not entirely sure how coherent that was. So please, somebody take the lightsaber mic away from me.
Take the light, Lisa.
Take the light.
You're the advocate of non-technology.
Yeah, I didn't say non-technology. I hear your concern, Daniel, and I find myself sometimes getting caught up in similar concerns and getting lost in, what the heck is going on in our society right now? Like, it just feels creepy. But what I always come back to is like this gaping attachment wound that we seem to have right now, this inability to have connection and community. That is just what feels most highlighted for me. And there's not a lot that I can do about, the rest of the world. And when I get lost in that, I feel pretty hopeless and pretty helpless and disappointed and sad. But where I try to focus my energy is where I can, and that's on the community and the connections that I do have access to. And how do I, as a teacher, as a therapist, continue to compel people to invest in the nourishment of attachment and the nourishment of connection, and to realize how much more they will get out of that than some of these, superficial, momentary glimpses of something. It's just such a disposable society right now with, social media and dating apps, and everything is moving really, really fast. And I feel like some people don't even know that it feels good to have a depth of connection because they haven't experienced it. They don't know what it's like to actually walk through a difficult experience with somebody and feel the connection on the other side. And, as a therapist with a very strong attachment background, I'm always going to come back to this probably with just about anything. I don't know. That's what came up for me, Daniel, when you were talking about that. It's just this lack of appreciation for human connection and community. And we're seeing that on a much larger scale. And I don't know how you get people to care about humanity who don't care about humanity.
Yeah. This is like connecting for me around, I just had to write a statement into one of my syllabi around using AI to write papers
Yeah.
because I'm pretty sure it's already happened. And there's some telltale signs. My wife and I did an experiment, could she get an AI paper past me? She couldn't, but they were pretty good. Like the information in them was correct. And, I won't go into why I could tell that it wasn't a human.
Right. All these Naropa students that we directed to the podcast, we don't want to give them the inside tips of how to sneak past the AI essays.
No. But I did have to write a statement about it. I'm like, don't use AI to write a paper. One, it's disrespectful. Two, and you miss the critical opportunity of your own education. You're missing the opportunity of developing a human skill, and you will never get it back, and you will never have it. Like, you will not lean on yourself. You will lean on something, and you will fall over without that strength that you developed. I didn't say all of that, but basically I did say you'd miss the opportunity. And I think there's something to that. Like, we have to learn how to use this technology, which, as you said, Daniel, was not developed for our benefit. Sometimes developed out of curiosity, but very quickly turned into a product for which we are a consumer. And it was developed for us to consume and benefit somebody else. And there's usefulness in it, but we have to be subversive with it to discover the usefulness. We have to take a subversive attitude to technology. If we don't, we're going to lose something because it's not, as you say, designed for our benefit. So that's a big deal to me. On the other hand, you can't try to live outside of it. I've seen a few examples of people today who are so out of touch that they will never be in touch again. They've missed the moment of how to connect with other people because they don't know how to access any of the technology now. And we live too far apart to meet. So, it's really interesting, that tension for me. Again, this is a can of worms, and those worms are never going back in, and we will not solve these things. But it's not about not living with it. I think it's about being subversive with it.
It's clearly not going away. I mean, already for many, many years, computers have been much smarter than humans and better than humans at certain kinds of tasks, like data analysis. You can feed in millions and millions of data points into computers, and they shoot out an analysis of it in a couple of minutes, something that would have been a multi-year, hundreds of staff member project back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And so it clearly has the opportunity to increase efficiency and efficacy. And there's technology that really excites me. Like, we have a 3D printer that can 3D print houses out of dirt. It's incredible. It's like, housing shortage? We can 3D print houses. That's awesome. That's some unfuck the world stuff. How do we have more of that? Then how does the technology that at least could be beneficial actually be put into service? But the main thing, I think, is just coming back around to the original point, is really like, is there a way that there can be some kind of collective call on a global scale in terms of the developers and disseminators of technology grappling with this for themselves? We're seeing an aspect of this around AI, right? It's very hot in the news and stuff right now. This whole idea of people who are developing AI realizing, oh, this might have a really bad potential. We may not have our eyes on benefiting humanity as a whole in an equitable way, but we definitely don't want to build the thing that is going to destroy us all. That would be bad. And so there seems to be some kind of ethical guardrails to some extent, but it's like, how do we have more of an actual collective vision and not just kind of haphazard create things, but really question what are our biggest issues around the world? How can technology help play a positive role in solving some of these issues to create the closest thing we can to a kind of heaven on earth? We already have so many things that it's people don't have to die and suffer in ways that was inevitable in the past. There's all these diseases that we now don't die at 20 from because we have a simple medicine for. Great. We need this collective agreement. So them are my thoughts.
Yeah. I said this to somebody the other day, like, we have all the intelligence, and I'm not going to say technology, we have all the intelligence collectively to solve all of our current problems. It's just that we're not. We're just not. We're not working together to do it all.
No doubt.
It's not like you lived in a certain region and there was a famine and you starved. Those famines still happen, but now collectively on the planet, we could move the resources from one place to another. It's just that we don't. And that is a moral failure. That is a failure of character. And so the one technology that we need to focus on is character, building a good human being. Mic drop.
Yeah, I like what you said, Nathaniel. And in a lot of ways, I don't think humans are emotionally mature enough evolutionarily. Like we just haven't evolved enough to get to a place where we can collectively use our intelligence for good. In some ways, I wonder if we're going backward. But what I do like to focus on just in my own mind is where I can have influence, and that's in my family, in my relationships, in how I'm impacting people in my life. Just keep reminding myself that that's the place where I want to keep building connection, building community. How quickly can I say I'm sorry when I cause harm to somebody I care about? How quickly do I receive the apology of another? Like, how fast can I let go of something that doesn't matter? That really just doesn't matter. It's not worth it. And remember how good it is, and how lucky I am to have people in my life who love me and care about me. And, so sometimes it's easy for me to get lost in my incredible concern about just how yucky, especially, post COVID. I mean, I think we really just saw firsthand how immature our society is, and just the inability just to have a conflict in a healthy way. I think we're all feeling pretty disappointed in ourselves. I don't know. I mean, that's how I walked out of the COVID experience. So I'm just always coming back to how can I keep doing a better job in my own family, with my children, with my relationships, my job. Because I don't want to answer that question, Daniel. So there.
She tone shifted you too. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's a great answer, and it is what I come back to as just this little, almost powerless person. What can I do? Like, I'm not in these rooms where they're making these decisions. How do you even do that? And there's this issue, right, of to be in those rooms, what do you have to do? What kind of a mindset do you have to have? And it often is a profits over people mindset. So part of why I bring it up in a space like this is part of the concern is, the world is full of great people who are taking care of the people in their families and in their communities directly around them. And that is maybe the only solution. And yet, while all of us little people are doing our little parts, there are huge forces that are actively shifting things on the planet. And technology is a huge thing around that. And so it's like affecting that level of what's happening on the planet Earth seems inevitable for our collective healing or even perseverance in terms of not going extinct. It's scary to think that there's so many good people doing their things, and yet one person or a small group of people can, say, start a nuclear war. There can be 8 billion people doing great things, and there can be a few 100,000 people doing terrible things, and it impacts everybody. And that is kind of the scary thought, and wanting, how do we have the like global petition of make technology do good things? You know, maybe that's like a new frontier in terms of there will be millions of people marching in the streets around the way technology is being used. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, we definitely should.
So on that very uplifting note, I'm wondering if we should maybe take another left turn, a full U-turn maybe, and move into a little closeout. As is our tradition, I'm wondering, Lisa, if you have a poem or song to share, but also if there are any closing thoughts aside from that, by all means. But feels like I've taken us to Bummerville, and I'd like to come back from Bummerville. Hopefully a little wiser, even if a little sad.
I think Realityville is not necessarily Bummerville. It just is. I mean, it's important to, to stay awake.
Those things are not mutually exclusive at all, though. It can definitely be the bummer of Realityville or the reality of Bummerville.
That's fair. Yeah.
So you're going to help us?
Oh, am I going to save you? Am I going to save you from reality?
Be our therapist.
I mean,
our therapist is supposed to save us, right?
Oh God, no. Thank God. Thank God. I'm just always going to come back to stay connected to your people and your community. Some of these thoughts can become such a distraction from appreciating and realizing what you do have and who's there and what is going right. Yeah. But life is life on life's terms, and sometimes it's a bummer. That's my big spiritual thought.
Lisa, by the way, has given me one of my favorite quotes. Years ago, she said, if you're hanging by a thread, cut the thread.
I still say that to people. Did you cut it?
I did. Or it just snapped. It just snapped.
And you lived to tell about it.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's agonizing to hang by a thread, just drop.
Yeah, let's cut the thread. Cut the thread. I wrote a poem at the beginning of summer. I write when I can't figure out my head. And it doesn't always help, but I did like the way that this one turned out, and felt kind of appropriate for the beginning of our conversation, maybe the end too.
Okay.
So I'll share it with you.
Please.
It's called Gutters.
You were supposed to take us out of the gutter.
I'm not that kind of person.
No, it's okay. Then drive us deeper into the gutter. Let's go.
Yep.
Okay. It's such a relief I didn't fall into a gutter of rushing dirty water today, or the lie about what love is. I like dirty gutters more than lies about love, but they aren't so different. I understand the disappointment of not having what you think you need. The feeling of failure runs deep. My cells carry on about it, mine, my mother's, my grandmother's. A sad story about wishing to be enough. Enough is overrated, as it turns out. It never stays or keeps things put. Enough is a gutter that goes to another gutter and then another one. Freedom, on the other hand, already is. Freedom is your breathing body. My exhale destroys your story. My inhale destroys mine. Let's destroy all the stories and call that destruction love. If you want to live a lie, if you want to be a gutter, if you want to pray desperate prayers all day for someone to think you are enough, you can choose that because you are free.
Amen.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for having me. This is fun. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. Shout out to friend of the show, Treefort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.